Even MIT couldn't solve this equation, Miss Tate. Let's see if the genius they call you is real or...
He flicked the chalk. It hit Whitney's desk and rolled to the floor.
30 seconds. Solve it or you're out of the scholarship program.
Whitney calmly stood up, slowly.
Professor, what if I solve it?
Dream on, stinking cockroach. 3 years I researched this. A fake from the slums isn't solving it. Pick it up. Fake genius. Come solve it.
Whitney's hand trembled once, then stopped. She didn't pick up the chalk. She walked past it, past Walsh, straight to the board. 30 seconds later, the professor would regret it. 30 seconds doesn't happen in 30 seconds. And this is how we got there. To understand what happened in that lecture hall, you need to know who Whitney Tate was and who Edward Walsh thought she was. Whitney was 22 years old, a senior at MIT, full scholarship. She lived with her grandmother in a 2-bedroom walk-up in Roxbury. The heat worked sometimes. The neighbors knew her by name. 5 nights a week, she worked the late shift at a diner in Central Square. From 11 at night until 4 in the morning, she poured coffee for taxi drivers and night students. Then she walked 20 minutes to campus and started her day. She slept 4 hours, sometimes 3. Her grandmother had a heart condition. The medications cost $300 a month. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover medication. It did not cover groceries. It did not cover the rent on the walk-up in Roxbury. So Whitney worked, and she studied. And she did not make excuses. She made math. 3 months before that colloquium, the Journal of Number Theory had published her undergraduate thesis. It was titled Generalizations of Modular Transformations over Imaginary Quadratic Fields. The paper was credited to W. Tate. No first name, no photograph. Most of the math department had skimmed the abstract. A few had read the introduction. Almost none of them knew the author was the quiet black girl in the 3rd row. But one person did. 3 years earlier, Edward Walsh had sat on Whitney's freshman placement committee. He had asked her, in front of 2 other professors, if she was comfortable in the level she'd tested into. He had used the word comfortable the way other men use the word qualified. Now, Walsh was 56 years old, tenured 18 years, a Cole Prize winner. He had supervised more than 30 PhDs. He wrote op-eds in the Chronicle of Higher Education about what he called standards drift at elite universities. When pressed, in private, he would say he meant exactly what everyone thought he meant. And he chaired the Vandenberg Memorial Fellowship, the most prestigious research grant the MIT Math Department awarded. That fall, Whitney Tate was one of 3 finalists. Walsh had told 2 colleagues over coffee that he didn't think she fit the profile. What he didn't tell them was what sat in his office. In the top drawer of a locked filing cabinet behind his desk sat a single yellow sheet of paper, handwritten, dated. A problem he called the Vandenberg equation, named for a colleague who had passed away in 2018. Walsh believed the problem was unsolvable. He believed it was his territory. He had been wrong about both for 3 months, and he didn't know it yet. Because on a quiet Tuesday in July, Whitney's paper had crossed the desk of a visiting Princeton mathematician named Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore had read it twice. She had circled 3 lines. She had written a note in the margin. This generalization changes everything. Who is W. Tate? She had flown to Cambridge that October to find out. That afternoon, the Vandenberg Memorial Colloquium was the most attended event of the semester. Killian Court was packed. The chair of the department, Dr. Margaret Sullivan, was there. 3 news outlets had sent reporters, including Henry Garrison from MIT Technology Review. The colloquium was supposed to be a celebration, a keynote, a polite announcement about the fellowship finalists. It was not supposed to be an execution. Whitney sat in the 3rd row, exactly where she always sat. She wore a clean white shirt. Her hair was tied back. Her notebook was open. She did not know what Walsh had written on the board that morning. She did not know Dr. Whitmore was sitting in the back row. The Princeton visitor was holding a journal open to one very specific page, She did not know that the locked filing cabinet was about to be opened in front of 200 witnesses. All she knew was that her grandmother had sent her a text at 6:42 that morning. It said, "Eat something today, baby." She had not eaten. She had been studying. And somewhere in the front of the room, a 56-year-old professor was about to pick up a piece of chalk. He had no idea he was about to ruin the next 20 years of his own career. But before any of that, he was going to call her a cockroach. We come back to that moment. Whitney walked past the chalk on the floor, past Walsh, straight to the blackboard. 200 faces tracked her every step. The room was so quiet you could hear her shoes on the wood. Walsh watched her go. The smile came back to his face. He had expected her to break. She hadn't broken. So now he would break her properly. He turned to face the audience. "Esteemed colleagues, what you are about to witness is what I call a teaching moment." He raised his voice so the back rows could hear. "For 3 years, I have worked on the equation now visible on this board. It is a generalization in modular forms. The standard techniques fail. 2 of my graduate students attempted it last spring. Both withdrew from the program." A few people laughed. Some did not. "And now," Walsh said, gesturing toward Whitney, "Miss Tate believes she can solve in 30 seconds what has resisted MIT for a decade." Dr. Margaret Sullivan stood up from the front row. "Edward, this is not the appropriate venue." "Margaret, sit down. The colloquium is open to demonstrations." "This is not a demonstration. This is a public—" "It is a test of standards, which is exactly what this department needs." Sullivan stayed standing for 2 long seconds. Then she sat down, slowly. She did not look at Whitney. She looked at her own hands. Walsh walked to the podium. From beneath it, he produced a small black device. He held it up so everyone could see. A digital stopwatch, the kind referees use. Large red digits, ready to count down from 30. "To make this fair," Walsh said, "I propose terms." He looked at Whitney. He smiled. "If you solve this equation in 30 seconds, verified by Dr. Sullivan, I will personally endorse you for the Vandenberg Fellowship. I will sign the letter today." The room held its breath. "If you fail, you withdraw your name from the fellowship. Tonight, in writing, in front of these witnesses." Sullivan's head snapped up. "Edward, you cannot impose. I am the chair of the selection committee. I can recommend whatever I like." Whitney still hadn't spoken. She was looking at the equation on the board. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't pull it out. She already knew what it said. "Eat something today, baby." She had not eaten. She had $300 to her name. The medications were due next week. Her grandmother needed groceries. The walk-up needed rent. In front of her, the man who had decided 3 years ago that she did not fit the profile was holding a stopwatch. In the back row, Dr. Eleanor Whitmore sat up straighter. She did not look surprised. She looked focused. Her right hand rested on a journal in her lap. The journal was already open to a specific page. Whitney turned slowly. She faced Walsh. "I accept." The room exhaled. "Set the clock, Professor." Walsh's smile grew. He thought he had won. He pressed the button. The red digits lit up. 30. He did not know that Whitney had already seen the answer. She had seen it the moment she walked up to the board. She had not picked up the chalk yet because she wanted Walsh to keep talking. She wanted him to dig the hole a little deeper. What had Whitney seen on that blackboard that the professor with 20 years of authority had missed? Whitney did not move toward the chalk. She stood at the blackboard. Her eyes traced the equation from left to right, then back again. Then she paused on a single symbol on the 3rd line. The clock dropped to 29, 28, 26. Walsh folded his arms. "Tick-tock, Miss Tate." She did not respond. The room began to murmur. A student in the 2nd row checked his watch. Sullivan looked down at her hands again. In the back, Dr. Whitmore did not move at all. She was watching Whitney's eyes. The clock hit 15, then 10. Walsh started smiling. The smile grew. "This is what I expected. Let the record show. The clock hit 5, 4, 3. Whitney stepped to the side of the blackboard. She walked the length of the equation, slowly, like she was reading a sentence she had read before. The clock hit 0. The buzzer sounded. Walsh raised his arms. There it is. Miss Tate, by the terms you accepted, you are now formally Professor. It was the first word Whitney had spoken since she'd accepted. Walsh stopped. There's an error on the board. The room went quiet. Walsh's smile froze. Excuse me? Whitney turned to face him. Her voice did not rise. Third line, the middle term. You have a plus sign. She paused. It should be a minus. 200 faces turned to the equation. Most of them couldn't read the symbols, but they could read Walsh's expression. His jaw tightened. A stylistic choice. The structure stands. No, sir, it doesn't. Whitney walked over to where the chalk had landed on the floor. She bent down. She picked it up, held it in her hand. She did not walk back to the board, not yet. She faced the room instead. The equation Professor Walsh wrote belongs to a class of problems in modular form theory. Every problem in that class has a standard structural form. A pause. In the standard form, the third term carries a minus, not a plus. It is not a stylistic choice. It is a load-bearing sign. She turned to Walsh. With your plus sign, the left side of the equation factors out completely. It collapses into a trivial identity. Trivial? Walsh's voice was sharp now. You're telling me... I'm telling you that as written, your equation isn't a hard problem. It isn't a problem at all. It says 0 equals 0. A laugh broke out from somewhere in the back row. Short, sharp. Then it was gone. Sullivan put a hand over her mouth. Walsh stepped forward. His voice was low now. I'd like to see you demonstrate that claim. On the board. Now. Of course. Whitney walked to the second blackboard. She picked up the chalk. She did not hurry. What happened over the next 90 seconds was simple. She didn't show every step. She didn't need to. She wrote 4 lines. In line 1, she rewrote the equation in its general structural form. In line 2, she factored the left side, just as she said it would. The factoring took one substitution. Anyone in the room with a graduate degree in number theory could follow it. In line 3, the entire expression collapsed. Both sides reduced to a single identity. In line 4, she wrote, 0 equals 0. She set the chalk down on the tray. She turned around. As written, Professor, the equation is correct, but it asks nothing. It is a typo dressed up as a problem. Silence. Then someone clapped. Once. A graduate student in the third row. He realized what he'd done and stopped, embarrassed. But the damage was done. A second person clapped, then a third. It was not applause for Whitney. Not yet. It was the sound of 200 people understanding, all at once, what they had just witnessed. A professor with a Cole Prize on his wall had written an equation specifically to embarrass a 22-year-old black woman, and he had embarrassed himself first. Walsh's face had gone from red to white. He walked to the board. He stared at the 4 lines Whitney had written. He could not refute them. He could see them. The equation he had written specifically to humiliate her had been an embarrassment to him from the moment he wrote it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned to face the audience. He smiled. The smile was thin and tight. It did not reach his eyes. A clever catch, Miss Tate. I will grant you that. But this was the warm-up. The actual demonstration begins now. He walked to the front row. He bent down. He reached into his briefcase. The room leaned forward. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was yellowed at the edges, handwritten in old ink, dated in the corner. He held the sheet up so the room could see. 3 years ago, Walsh said, a colleague of mine, Professor Vandenberg, passed away. He left behind a problem he had been working on for the last decade of his life. I have continued that work in his memory. His voice steadied. He was finding his footing again. This is the real Vandenberg equation. It is not in any textbook. It is not published anywhere. It has not been solved by anyone in this department, including myself. He looked at Whitney. If you can find a typo in this one, Miss Tate, I will be very impressed. He turned. He walked to a fresh section of blackboard. He picked up the chalk. He uncapped his pen for the marginal notes, and he began to write. What was on that yellow sheet of paper that Walsh had been hiding in his office for 3 years? The chalk moved across the board. Walsh wrote in his own handwriting now. He was no longer reading off the yellow sheet. He had this problem memorized. It took him nearly 2 minutes to finish writing it. When he was done, the blackboard held a dense set of expressions across 4 lines. Variables on top of variables. Greek letters layered over Latin ones. The kind of problem that would make a graduate student close their laptop and go for a walk. The room had gone still. Walsh stepped back. He admired his own work. This, he said, is what real mathematics looks like, not parlor tricks. He turned to Sullivan. Margaret, I propose we use the same stake. Sullivan stood up again. This time, she did not sit down. Edward, you have already humiliated this department once today. I will not allow you to. If she solves it, I endorse her for the fellowship. If she does not, she withdraws. Same terms, same witnesses. Edward, I accept. It was Whitney. She was standing next to the new equation. Sullivan turned. Miss Tate, you do not have to. I accept the terms, Dr. Sullivan. Thank you. Whitney's voice was calm. Her face was calm. The room was not calm. In the back, Dr. Whitmore quietly opened the journal in her lap. She turned to a page she had marked. She folded the corner. She did not look up. Phones began to rise across the room. 12, then 50. 2 news cameras zoomed in from the side aisles. A junior faculty member in the second row pulled out his phone and started a stopwatch. He set it visible on his desk so Whitney could see it. The countdown was over. The new test had no deadline. It had something worse. The patience of an entire auditorium watching her think. Walsh stepped down. He took a seat in the front row. He crossed his legs. He was smiling again. But his right hand, the hand holding the yellow sheet, was trembling. Just slightly. Most people couldn't see it. Whitney could. She picked up the chalk. She walked along the length of the equation. She did not say anything. For 30 seconds, she did not say anything. The room held its breath. Somewhere in the third row, a phone made a small notification sound. The students silenced it without looking. Hold up. 3 years this guy hid that problem in his desk, then dropped it on a 22-year-old just to humiliate her. That's not a test. That's a setup. And he has no idea who he just picked. Whitney walked back to the start of the equation. She studied the first line, then the second, then the third. She paused. Her head tilted just slightly. The way a person tilts their head when they hear a song they recognize but can't quite place. She remembered something. 3 years earlier, in the basement of a community center in Roxbury, a man named Dr. Calvin Booker had drawn a problem on a whiteboard. Whitney had been 16 years old. She had been the only girl in the room. Booker was a retired math teacher. He had taught at the local high school for 31 years. He had never published. He had never been famous. But every Saturday morning, he opened the doors of the community center and ran a free math club for any kid who showed up. That morning, he had told her something. He had said it without looking at her. Whitney, when the front door is locked, walk around the back. Whitney looked at Walsh's equation. She saw the front door. It was the standard approach, the method any graduate student would reach for first. The method Walsh had clearly anticipated. The method that would have her stuck at the board for an hour while the audience grew restless. The standard approach would not work, but the back door was hiding in plain sight. It was sitting on the third line, a specific configuration of 2 terms that, under one substitution, could be reframed as something else entirely, something older, something solved. She set the chalk against the board. She began to write. The room exhaled. And in the back row, Dr. Whitmore turned to a colleague seated beside her and whispered something. The colleague's face changed. He looked at the equation on the board. He looked at Whitney. He looked back at the journal in Whitmore's lap, and he reached for his phone. What did Dr. Whitmore see in that journal that the rest of the room could not? Whitney started at the leftmost board. She would not solve the equation in one motion. No one could. The problem was too dense. So she did what every great mathematician does first. She decomposed it. She broke the equation into 3 substructures. She wrote each one on a separate board. The first substructure looked clean, a modular form transformation, textbook. The second substructure was harder. It involved a parameter that didn't reduce under the standard methods. The third substructure was where the trap lived. Whitney didn't know that yet. She would in 9 minutes. She started with the first. Her chalk moved fast now. Symbols filled the leftmost board. In the audience, a graduate student in the front row leaned forward. "What is she doing?" he whispered. His colleague did not answer. He was watching the board. 2 minutes passed. Whitney finished the first substructure. She drew a clean box around the final expression. It was a mini victory. The first piece of the problem now had a known reduction. She moved to the second board. Walsh shifted in his seat. He uncrossed his legs. He could see what she was doing. He had not expected her to attack the problem this way. The standard graduate school approach was to push through the equation as one long chain. The decomposition method took longer to set up, but worked better on complex structures. He had not taught Whitney to think this way. Someone else had. He didn't know who, and that bothered him more than he wanted it to. Whitney started on the second substructure. She tried the standard method first. It was the obvious move, the one any examiner would expect. It did not work. She stared at the board. 3 of her lines collapsed into a contradiction. She erased them. The audience murmured. Walsh smiled wider. Whitney did not look at him. She tried a second method, a common alternative. It also did not work. 4 more lines erased. The chalkboard had a thin layer of dust on it now. Whitney's right hand was white to the wrist. There was a smudge on her cheek where she had wiped sweat with the back of her hand. She did not notice. A junior faculty member in the second row glanced at his stopwatch. He turned the phone toward his neighbor. 8 minutes had passed. "Take your time, Miss Tate." It was Walsh from the front row. His voice was warm now, almost paternal, the kind of voice a coach uses on a player he expects to lose. "We've waited a decade. We can wait an hour." A few people in the back laughed. Some did not. Whitney did not turn around. She stepped back from the second board. She studied it. The standard method failed. The common alternative failed. The textbook had 3 more options. She could already see that none of them would work either. That was the moment she remembered her own paper. The undergraduate thesis. The one Walsh had passed with the margin note, "Ambitious, will not generalize." In that paper, she had introduced a substitution technique. It was not in any textbook. She had derived it herself 2 years earlier. She had been sitting at the diner counter at 3 in the morning. A customer was sleeping in the booth behind her. The radio was playing low. She had been writing on the back of an order pad. The first version of the substitution had taken her 4 nights. She had thrown out 15 drafts. She had slipped the final version into her backpack on a napkin and walked the 20 minutes back to Roxbury through the snow. She had used that substitution to solve a class of problems no one had solved before, including, possibly, this one. She raised the chalk. She erased the second board completely. The audience reacted. A wave of small sounds, confusion, doubt, sympathy. Walsh laughed once, loudly. Whitney didn't hear him. She wrote her own substitution at the top of the board. Then she ran the second substructure through it. The parameter reduced. Clean. Mini victory number 2. In the back row, Dr. Whitmore made a small sound in her throat. Not quite a laugh, closer to recognition. In the front row, Walsh's face changed. He recognized the technique. He had read that paper. He had been on the committee. He had told 3 colleagues that summer that the technique was interesting but limited and would not generalize beyond toy examples. Whitney was using it to solve his decade-old problem. His right hand tightened on the yellow sheet. Whitney had to keep going. The second substructure had subparts. She worked through them. One reduced. Then a second reduced. Then she made a sign error. She didn't catch it for 2 lines. When she did catch it, she froze. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. She erased 2 lines. She rewrote them. A small murmur went through the audience again. Walsh leaned forward. His face was tight with something that almost looked like hope. Whitney took a breath. She kept going. She finished the second substructure. She drew a box around it. It was rougher than the first, but it was done. She moved to the third board. The clock on the junior faculty member's phone read 11 minutes. The audience had been silent for the last 4. They were not bored anymore. They were not impatient. They were watching a person work. Whitney looked at the third substructure. She started to write. She wrote 2 lines. Then she stopped. Her chalk was 3 inches from the board. It did not move. She stared at the second line. She did not write anything else. She did not move. For a long 10 seconds, the room watched her not move. Walsh, who had been smiling, stopped smiling. In the third row, a phone slipped slightly in someone's hand. They caught it without looking. They were not breathing. Something had happened on that board. Something Whitney could see. Something Walsh could see now too. But no one in the audience knew what it was. Sullivan stood up halfway, then sat back down. Dr. Whitmore, in the back, leaned forward in her seat. She closed the journal in her lap. Slowly. Whitney lowered the chalk. She turned away from the board. She walked to the side of the lecture hall. She did not say anything. She did not look at Walsh. She did not look at the equation. She put her hand against the wood paneling of the side wall. She closed her eyes. For 5 seconds, she did not move. In the front row, Walsh sat very still. His right hand, the one that had been trembling earlier, was now completely still. He looked at the third substructure on the board. His face went pale. What had Whitney just seen on that blackboard? And what was Walsh now realizing, 12 minutes too late? Dr. Whitmore stood up. She did not move toward the front. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood in the back row, holding the journal in her right hand. Margaret? The room turned. Sullivan looked up. I think we should pause this demonstration. Walsh stood up immediately. Dr. Whitmore, with respect. Margaret, please come look at this. Sullivan crossed the room. She did not look at Walsh. She did not look at Whitney. She walked to the back row and stopped in front of Whitmore's seat. Whitmore handed her the journal. It was already open. The corner of the page was folded. Sullivan looked at the page. She read for 10 seconds. Then she read it again. Her face went still in a particular way. It was the stillness of someone who has just understood something they cannot un-understand. She looked up. She looked at Walsh. Edward, where did you say this problem came from? Walsh's voice rose. Margaret, that is irrelevant. Edward. It is a private extension of Professor Vandenberg's unpublished work. I have already explained. Edward. The problem on that blackboard appears to be a direct transformation of a result published 3 months ago in the Journal of Number Theory. She paused. By W. Tate. The room went silent. Walsh's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That is a coincidence. The structures are only superficially similar. It is the same generalization, Edward, with 1 substitution reversed and 3 variables renamed. Sullivan's voice was steady. You wrote a problem on this board and told 200 people you had been working on it privately for 3 years. You then asked one of your own undergraduates to solve it, in front of witnesses. Knowing the technique she would need was the technique she had already published. A pause. And you sat on her thesis committee. Walsh's face was white now, whiter than when he had seen the third substructure on the board. This is a misreading. Anyone who actually reads the technical literature would see that my formulation is original? The word came from Whitney. She had opened her eyes and turned away from the wall. She was standing at the side of the lecture hall, looking at Walsh. Walsh did not answer her. He turned to Sullivan instead. Margaret, the terms of the demonstration still stand. She has not solved the third substructure. Let her finish. Let her prove she did not just memorize her own result. Sullivan looked at Whitney. Miss Tate, you do not have to continue. Whitney walked back to the blackboard. She picked up the chalk. Dr. Sullivan, I would like to finish. She turned to face Walsh. What did Whitney see in his face that made her decide to keep going? Whitney turned to the third substructure. She picked up where she had left off. 2 lines were already on the board. She extended to a third. Her hand was steadier than it had been 5 minutes ago. She had Sullivan on her side now. The fraud had been named. The room understood what had happened. But Walsh was still in the front row, and Walsh was watching every stroke of her chalk. She wrote the 4th line, then the 5th, then the 6th. On the 6th line, she made a mistake. It was a small mistake, a coefficient in the middle of a substitution. She dropped a factor of 2, the kind of error a tired person makes when 200 people are watching their hands. She didn't catch it. She wrote another line. The error propagated. She wrote one more. Walsh stood up. There. He pointed at the 6th line. There. Right there. The technique fails. As I said in committee, the substitution doesn't generalize past a single parameter family. Sullivan stepped forward. Edward, sit down. Margaret, look at the board. She has propagated an error through 3 lines. This is exactly what I... Whitney looked at the 6th line. She saw the dropped coefficient. Her stomach dropped. Her hand began to shake. She was 22 years old. She had slept 3 hours. She had not eaten since dinner the night before. She had $300 in her checking account and a grandmother who needed medication, and she had just made an error in front of 200 people. Walsh kept talking. She did not hear the words. She heard other words instead. She heard the guidance counselor in her junior year of high school who had suggested she consider a more realistic major. She heard the calculus teaching assistant who had graded her midterm twice, just to be sure. She heard the admissions officer who had asked her if she was sure she wanted MIT. She heard the professor in her sophomore year who had told her, after class, that she spoke very well for a girl from her neighborhood. She heard every voice, all at once. Her hand stopped shaking. It went still. She set the chalk down on the tray. The room read it as surrender. A long exhale went through the auditorium. Walsh stopped mid-sentence. His face shifted. The smile came back. Dr. Sullivan, by the terms, take a breath, Miss Tate. The voice came from the back of the room. Dr. Whitmore was standing again. She had not approached the board. She had not raised her hand. She simply stood, in her seat, with her arms at her sides. Take a breath, and trust what you saw first. Whitney did not turn around, but she heard it. She heard another voice on top of it, her grandmother's voice, from a phone call 6 weeks earlier, when Whitney had cried into the receiver about a paper rejection. You don't owe them small, baby. Whitney closed her eyes. She did not see the error on the board. She saw the equation as it had looked the moment she first walked up to it. She saw the entire structure, all 4 lines, all 3 substructures. And she saw what she had seen in the first 30 seconds, before the textbook methods, before her own substitution, before the obstacles, before any of it. She had seen an isomorphism, a reframing of the problem into a completely different mathematical space, a space where the answer was already known. She had seen it, and she had dismissed it, because it had looked too simple. She had walked the long way around for 12 minutes, trying to prove herself with the harder path. She did not need the harder path. She opened her eyes, she picked up the chalk, and she walked to the next empty blackboard. What was Whitney about to do that no one in the room had seen coming? Whitney walked back to the first blackboard. She picked up an eraser. She did not look at Walsh. She started erasing. The first board went blank, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. Every line she had written for the last 12 minutes was gone. The chalkboards were dark and clean, the air filled with chalk dust. The audience exhaled in confusion. Some leaned forward, some pulled out their phones again. A faculty member in the third row whispered to his neighbor, "What is she doing?" His neighbor did not answer. Walsh stood up. "What are you doing?" Whitney did not answer. She finished erasing. Chalk dust hung in the air around her. She set the eraser down on the tray. She walked to the lectern, to the digital stopwatch Walsh had placed there at the beginning. She picked it up. She held it in her hand. She turned to face Walsh. "Professor, you said 30 seconds at the start of this demonstration." A pause. "May I have it back?" Walsh blinked. The question was so unexpected that he answered before he could think. "Yes, fine. Take the 30 seconds. It changes nothing." He sat down. Whitney walked to the front of the auditorium. She set the stopwatch down on the lectern. She turned it so the audience could see the red digits. She reset it to 30. She walked back to the leftmost blackboard, now empty. She picked up a fresh piece of chalk. She turned her back to the board. For 5 seconds she did not move. Sullivan stepped forward gently. "Miss Tate, are you ready?" Whitney did not turn around. "Dr. Sullivan, please start the clock." Sullivan walked to the lectern. She put her finger on the button. She looked once at Whitney. She looked once at Walsh. She pressed it. The red digits lit up. 30, 29, 28. Whitney turned to the board. She raised the chalk, and she did not stop moving until the clock hit 0. What she wrote across the next 30 seconds was not the long path. It was the short one. In the first line, she rewrote Walsh's entire equation under a single change of variables. The substitution reframed the problem into a different mathematical space, an older space, a space that mathematicians had been studying for 60 years. In the second line, she pointed the equation directly at a known theorem, a result proved in 1962 by a French mathematician, a theorem that appeared in every graduate textbook on the subject. In the third line, she applied the theorem. The fourth line was the answer. The fifth line translated the answer back into the original language of Walsh's problem. That was it. 5 lines. 25 seconds in, the graduate student in the third row gasped audibly. He had recognized the change of variables. He nudged the colleague next to him. They both stared. 20 seconds in, Walsh leaned forward in his chair. His mouth opened slightly. He recognized the change of variables. He had not seen it. In 20 years of working with modular forms, he had not seen it. 15 seconds in, Dr. Whitmore stood up, quietly, behind the back row where almost no one saw her. 10 seconds in, Dr. Sullivan put a hand over her mouth. 5 seconds in, a first-year graduate student in the third row whispered the words, "Oh my God," into his hand and could not stop himself. 2 seconds in, Whitney set the chalk down on the tray. She turned to face the audience. The clock hit 0. The buzzer sounded. The room did not move. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then Dr. Sullivan stood up. She walked to the front of the auditorium. She picked up a clean pair of reading glasses from her bag. She put them on. She walked the length of the board. She read line 1, then line 2, then line 3, then line 4, then line 5. She went back to line 1. She read it again. 20 seconds passed, then 30. The room held its breath. Sullivan turned to the audience. "The solution is correct." The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then Sullivan turned to Walsh. Her voice did not rise, but it carried to every row in the room. "Professor Walsh, the technique Miss Tate just used to solve your equation is published 3 months ago in the Journal of Number Theory by W. Tate." She paused. "This is her own paper." Walsh said nothing. "You wrote a problem on this board, in front of 200 witnesses, that you claimed had resisted MIT for a decade. You then asked one of your own undergraduates to solve it. And she did, in 30 seconds. using her own published work. The same work that was on your desk 18 months ago when you signed her thesis with the note, quote, "will not generalize." Sullivan removed her glasses. She held them in her hand. She did not memorize her result. She invented it. And she just used it to solve a problem you have spent 3 years claiming was unsolvable. Walsh's mouth opened. No sound came out. His right hand was on the armrest. It had gone white. Whitney walked to the lectern. She did not pick up the microphone. She did not need to. The room had not breathed in a full minute. She set the chalk down on the tray next to the stopwatch. She looked at Walsh. "Professor." Walsh looked up, slowly. "You said even MIT can't solve this equation." She paused. "You forgot something." The room held its breath. "I am MIT." For 1 full second, nothing happened. Then, a junior faculty member in the second row began to clap. Then, a graduate student. Then another. Then, the entire second row. Then the third. Then the fourth. Sullivan did not stop them. In the back, Dr. Whitmore did not clap. She was smiling. She was already opening her phone to call Princeton. Walsh sat in the front row. He did not move. He looked at the 5 lines on the blackboard. He could not refute them. He had built his career on a problem that a 22-year-old black undergraduate had just solved using her own technique. In 30 seconds. In front of 200 witnesses, with 3 news cameras rolling. What was about to happen to Edward Walsh in the next 10 minutes? The applause did not stop. It rolled from the second row to the third, from the third to the fourth. By the time it reached the back, the entire hall was on its feet. Whitney stood at the lectern. She did not bow. She did not smile. She picked up her notebook and held it to her chest. In the third row, Henry Garrison was no longer watching the front. He was watching his phone. His thumbs moved fast across the screen. 2 attendees in the front section had already emailed the office of the MIT provost. The first email arrived at 3:14 in the afternoon. The second arrived 11 seconds later. The subject line of the first read, "Urgent Academic Integrity Matter, Vandenberg Fellowship." The subject line of the second was identical. Both emails contained the same 3 words, Dr. Edward Walsh. In the second row, a graduate student pulled out her tablet. She tapped twice. The Journal of Number Theory loaded on the screen. She turned to the page Whitmore had folded over. She walked to the front. She handed the tablet to Sullivan. Sullivan looked at the screen. She turned it to face the audience. She held it up next to the blackboard. 200 people compared the page to the 5 lines Whitney had just written. The page and the lines were the same technique, side by side. Anyone with eyes could see it. A second wave of applause started. In the back, Dr. Whitmore walked down the center aisle. She did not hurry. She stopped in front of Whitney. She did not hug her. She did not lecture her. She handed her a small white business card. "Princeton would like to talk to you on Monday." Whitney took the card. She put it in her pocket. Sullivan stepped to the front. She raised her voice for the first time all afternoon. "For the record, the Vandenberg Fellowship Selection Committee will be reconstituted before any decision is announced. Effective immediately." She paused. "Professor Walsh will not be on it." Walsh stood at the lectern. His hand was still on the wood. He did not look at the audience. He looked older than he had 20 minutes ago. What was in the email that had just been forwarded to the dean of the School of Science? The hall emptied slowly. People did not leave in a rush. They walked out in small groups, talking quietly, looking back at the blackboard one more time before they reached the doors. Some stopped to shake Whitney's hand on the way out. She thanked each of them by name when she knew the name. She thanked them politely when she did not. A junior faculty member stopped at her desk. He did not say anything. He just put his right hand over his heart, nodded once, and walked away. 20 minutes later, the hall was nearly empty. The only people remaining were Whitney, who was packing her notebook into her bag, and Edward Walsh, who was still standing near the lectern. He walked toward her, slowly. The few graduate students who remained went quiet. Walsh stopped 2 feet away from Whitney. He did not extend his hand. He spoke quietly. "Miss Tate, I was wrong about your paper." A pause. "And I was wrong about you." He looked at the blackboard, then back at her. "I'm sorry." Whitney looked at him for a long moment. She did not smile. She did not glare. She said one thing. "Read it next time, Professor." She zipped her bag. She walked past him. She walked up the aisle. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of Killian Court. The cold Cambridge afternoon hit her face. The sun was low. The wind moved through the trees on the lawn. A student on a bicycle passed her without looking up. She pulled out her phone. She dialed her grandmother. The line picked up on the second ring. "Hello, baby." Whitney walked across the courtyard. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Grandma, I think I did okay today. I'm telling you this because I've seen too many smart people get pushed down by rooms that don't see them. Whitney didn't fight that professor. She just refused to be small. Keep doing the work. The room will go quiet for you too." If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with the moment that broke you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the room will eventually get quiet for the right person.